Howdy, and welcome to episode 35 of T-Shirts and Shawls. I'm Karen, and today is Thursday, August 10th, 2017. So I sat down to record today's episode, and usually I use a tripod that has kind of a special little mount thing for my phone, so I can kind of do different angles and be able to get kind of hopefully the best shot for the recording. But I seem to have misplaced the tripod. I did some rearranging in my room. And I know I've had it since I did the rearranging, because the episode I filmed 2 weeks ago, I had it and the room was already rearranged then. So I really have no idea where it is. I'm going to have to find that. Anyway, I will stop talking about that. Hopefully this little setup that I have now, maybe you won't even notice that I'm not using the usual tripod. But anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. Today's shirt is one that I actually had to get into the top of my closet, where I keep kind of shirts that I don't really wear very much anymore, but that I don't want to get rid of. I had to dig it out from up there, which I'm not really sure why it's up there, because it fits just fine and it's something that I would be happy to still wear. So it might now make its way down from the top of the closet into the regular clothes. Anyway, so let me stand up so you can see the full thing. So this says Rent, and if you are familiar with it, it is the musical Rent. And I actually got this shirt when I saw the musical many years ago. I believe it was when the touring company came through Dallas. So I got to see it. Really wonderful experience. And as much as I'm loving Hamilton right now, probably Rent is my favorite musical. And I remember the first time that I listened to Rent. So 20 years ago, exactly 20 years ago, summer, I was an undergrad, so it was between my sophomore and junior years at A&M. I was taking classes that summer. I was a resident advisor in the dorm, and I remember one day I walked to Hastings, which is a store that does books, videos, and music. It was quite a hike to get there. I didn't have a car, so I had to walk. And I don't know what it was about Rent that made me choose it. But for some reason I was in the musical sections, because I like musicals, and I guess it caught my eye, and I went ahead and bought it and brought it back to my dorm room. And I just remember sitting down for the length of time, so maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, the length of time of the musical, and putting the music in my CD player and opening up the liner notes so I could read along with the lyrics. And I just sat there and just listened and read along. And it hooked me from the very beginning. It was different from the other musicals that I was familiar with, which my big ones were, Phantom of the Opera, Les Mis, Miss Saigon, those more traditional musicals in a way. And so this was something very different. But it also grabbed me because of the story it told and the characters that were a part of it. And if you're not familiar with the musical, first of all, definitely recommended. But if you're not familiar with it, basically it's a group of young people, probably in the early 20s, who live in New York City, who are very poor, and who are basically just trying to survive. There are many different relationships. They're all a group of friends, but there are many different romantic relationships, several different sexualities that are represented. There is drug usage, and several of the characters have AIDS. And it's a kind of a retelling of the opera La Boheme, where some of the characters have, I believe it's tuberculosis. So kind of taking that into a more modern type of setting. So even though these characters had experiences that I wasn't part of my life, I definitely lived a much more sheltered upbringing compared to the experiences that these characters were going through. But there was just something about those experiences that really struck a nerve and really, I don't know, really just made me feel very emotionally connected to the characters and to what they were going through. And so I definitely listened to Rent quite a lot that summer, and then over the next few years, like I said, I got to see it, a touring company, when it came through Dallas. And it's still, 20 years later, a musical that I love. And like I said, as much as I'm really loving Hamilton still, Rent is still the thing that my musical. And so the reason that I picked to talk about it is because this past weekend, I rewatched the movie. So, I could figure out the date, and I could actually look it up too. But they made a movie version of the musical. I think it was about 10 years after the musical opened, so maybe about 10 years ago. And almost all of the roles in the movie are played by the original Broadway cast. And there are two roles that are not. So it's really, really wonderful to see kind of that connection that the people, the actors, had to the roles, and seeing that in the movie form. And although the movie changes up the story a little bit, they kind of move the timeline around a bit. Some of the characters, like Maureen and Joanne, don't break up and get back together quite as often as they do in the actual musical version. The movie still feels very much, it gets to the heart of the story and the core of the story. And so it's been a while since I've watched the movie, so it felt really good to watch it again. And it was still hitting me all in the emotional places, a little tearful at times. So it's such a powerful story. But I think that the reason why it is so powerful is that even if you can't identify specifically with the situations that the characters are going through, what the musical really shows is that these are people who truly, truly care for one another. They, as much as they sometimes fight, as much as they have, they definitely have messy relationships. So I guess it's very realistic in that way. Relationships are messy in this musical. But at its core, these are people who truly, truly care for one another and who matter to one another. And I think for them, that wasn't the case in kind of the larger world. Most of these characters were people that didn't matter so much to, I guess, larger society. And so within their group, they really, really cared for one another. And the heart of that group is the relationship between Collins and Angel. And I think that relationship in particular is a really good example of what a relationship that has its issues. Both of the characters have AIDS. A relationship that has its issues, but that can still be very successful. If you're not familiar with Rent, I don't want to spoil anything for you, so I won't say what happens in the musical to them. But when I was teaching at Purdue, when I was a graduate student, for freshman composition, so the way Purdue had its freshman composition structured is that there were several different approaches to teaching composition that the department had come up with, and as a teacher you picked one of those approaches and that's what you used for teaching your composition class. But several of us came up with different approaches that we wanted to try out and pilot. And so I was in a group that came up with an approach that was based all around the topic of gender. And so there was a semester where so it was my second year at Purdue, we piloted that approach. And that was the semester that the movie Rent came out. And even before seeing the movie, because I was familiar with the musical, I really wanted to encourage my students to go see it, since it was definitely something that was hitting in our topic for the class. And so I offered them an extra credit assignment to go watch the movie and then to write basically a reflection paper about it. And not very many of the students took me up on that offer, but I do remember there was one female student who did, and I still remember her name. I kind of still can see her face, because she said, first of all, she said that she went to go see the movie with her grandmother, which kind of made me think, wow, that's really not the movie I would have chosen to take my grandmother to, but it actually turned out okay. She said that her grandmother enjoyed the movie very, very much. But what she wrote about in her paper was that, and she didn't say this in so many words, but basically she lived a very sheltered life. She really hadn't been exposed to alternate relationships and situations, and that the relationship between Angel and Collins showed her that love is love, no matter who that love is between. And it was really powerful and impactful to her. And it also showed her what a healthy relationship, even though these two are physically unhealthy, what a truly committed relationship looks like. And for her, it was a really, really powerful example of that. So I still think of her in her paper whenever I'm listening to Rent, or I thought of her when I was watching it, watching the movie this weekend. Anyway, so that's, I can see by the time on my phone that I've been talking about this for quite a while, but it is something that really is powerful and moving and inspiring. And if you are not familiar with it, check out the musical, give it a listen, or watch the movie version. And if you are familiar with it, if it's been a while since you've listened or watched, maybe this will kind of prompt you to check it out again. Or maybe you're like me and it's never, gone that far away, and it's pretty consistent in your listening or watching. Anyway, so I guess I will go ahead and stop talking about Rent. Go listen to it or watch it if you have not, or even if you have, take some time to rewatch it. So the shawl I'm going to talk about today is one that I designed, and it is called Laudine, and I will link it in the show notes. Basically, I designed this shawl. It was my second shawl design, and I wanted to do a couple of different things with it. So the first thing that I did is I used a worsted weight yarn instead of fingering weight, because most shawls are fingering weight, and I thought, I'll do something different. I'll do a worsted weight shawl. So I started that, and then I wanted to use multiple colors. And so I was doing this triangular design, so that made the multiple colors kind of make a little chevron pattern. And then I also wanted to use a textured stitch. And in my head, I had something else in mind, which now I don't even remember what that something else was. But anyway, so it has this really textured stitch, which technically, if I remember right, I didn't take a look back at the pattern, I think is almost a seed stitch or moss stitch type of thing that creates that look. And then the colors that I picked were based upon what I had in my stash. Since I knew it was worsted weight, and especially at this point, I made sure that I always use the same yarn, so yarn base for a project. The only yarn in worsted weight that I had a lot of different colors of was Malabrigo Merino worsted, so that's what this is. So I went through my stash and picked out colors that I thought would work. Probably if I were picking this out again, I probably wouldn't have done the brown. I don't know, because also the brown shows up down here. So knitting along on this, and thinking about how I want to end it. And then I get this bright idea that it would be really great to include a ruffle on the end. And honestly, this is the type of stitch pattern that you could have taken this stitch pattern to the end and used it, and it really would not have curled very much. Like the ruffle itself actually has a little bit of curl on the edge because the ruffle is in stockinette. But for some reason, I decided to do a ruffle. And when you do a ruffle, basically you increase very quickly. And so you already have a whole bunch of stitches on your needle. So you can see that's just half of the shawl. So a whole bunch of stitches on your needle, and then you double them really fast. And then you have even more stitches on your needle, and then when you bind off, you have a gazillion stitches to bind off. Which is probably why the next shawl that I designed, I learned the knitted on border technique where you don't have to bind off a gazillion stitches. Anyway, so I'm saying all of this about the pattern. This pattern has been my most dismal failure. Of all the patterns I've designed, this is the bomb. This has bombed. Like, it's not the bomb as in a good thing, this bombed. It did not go over very well. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it is and by not going well, I just wanted to make it super clear. When I called for test knitters, I usually would have liked to have 6 test knitters for this. 3 who did the charted instructions and 3 who did the written instructions. And I don't remember exactly the process, but I only ended up with 3 test knitters, and I think it was a little bit of pulling teeth to get even those 3. So that was probably a little bit of a hint that, if people weren't really excited about test knitting, maybe they weren't excited about the pattern. And then I released the pattern, and I released it to crickets. Or maybe even 1 cricket. It did not sell at all. 0 sales. Talk about disheartening. Yeah, that was very, very disheartening. And then maybe a year and a half later, I was taking part in a business confidence challenge that Tara Swiger hosted. It was the first, she runs it a couple of times a year, and it was the first time that she did it. So the Biz Confidence Challenge. And so you did it on Instagram. And so one of the picture prompts was talk about one of your big failures in business, and then kind of where you went after, like what would the worst case scenario could have been, and then how you moved past that. Because obviously if you're still still in business and still doing stuff, you've moved past that failure. So I took a picture of this shawl and talked about how it was a dismal failure. It hadn't sold at all. And but I didn't let that stop me. I continued to design a shawl pattern, although I've never done another worsted weight shawl. And the next shawl pattern that I designed did a lot better. Anyway, so when I posted that on Instagram, I got 1 sale. Somebody bought this shawl pattern. Kind of feel like it's a bit of a pity buy. So it got 1 sale. And then with my newest book that came out, the test knitters for the book got a choice of either getting a discount on the book, or they could have picked one of my patterns to get for free as a thank you for test knitting. And one of the test knitters actually did pick this pattern as her pattern for free for test knitters. So in all this time, it has sold once, and 1 person has requested it as their gift for test knitting. So yeah, when I say failure, I want you to know I really mean failure. And by the way, a little side note, this is not like a please go buy this pattern type of discussion. If you like this pattern, fantastic. Please don't feel like you need to go buy it. Anyway, so the reason I wanted to talk about it is because some of it is, why did it fail? Because I want to make sure that I don't necessarily do something like that again. So possibly it's because it's worsted weight, and most people do shawls and fingering weight, especially if a lot of my sales come from the local area. So here in Texas, there's not much call for a worsted weight shawl. Maybe the colors didn't appeal to people. I know in the pictures, sometimes colors really matter. Although speaking of pictures, I was really happy. I did the photography for this one. My sister was my model. I was really, really happy with the pictures that we got for it. So it was extra, you know, kind of crushing when no sales happened. So maybe it's that. Maybe the stitch pattern texture is not appealing. Maybe the pictures don't show the texture enough, and I should have done some type of close-up that showed that off. Maybe the ruffle, because I've got to admit, if I were to do this again, I would not do the ruffle. So maybe the ruffle is the thing that turns people away from it. I don't know. Whatever it is that made this bomb. I can't say exactly for sure, but you know, there are some ideas in mind of what potentially could have happened to it. But the reason that I wanted to show it to you is kind of that confidence type of thing. You know, I could have let this say, hey, you put out this design and nobody wanted it, therefore your designs are horrible, all of your designs are horrible, and nobody is ever going to buy your designs, you should just give up now. And I think that sometimes that happens a lot to us, and that's what especially Tara Swagger was trying to do in her Biz Confidence Challenge, showing that that you've been able to move on from some of these failures, and you can do something a lot better out of that. So so I just thought I would share a little bit about my failure. This is a little tag that tells all about it. I'll admit that because it's been such a failure, I've stopped taking this sample to shows. I don't show it off anymore. I only have like 2 copies in print of the pattern for sale because, like I said, it hasn't ever sold. And so why invest in inventory of the print copies? So in some ways, because it didn't sell, I stopped promoting it. And so of course it's not going to sell if I just kind of let it sit there either. But I also didn't let it stop me from continuing. Like I said, I probably won't do another worsted weight shawl, but I definitely enjoy designing shawls. So it hasn't stopped me from doing that. And I do admit I haven't really gone back and done kind of colors and stripes. Perhaps because of this, maybe I should try that again. But I definitely leave off the ruffle. Yeah. And maybe I can make that as a kind of an option for this pattern, what to do if you do want to leave off the ruffle, because like I said, you should just be able to end with this same stitch pattern and not have to worry about the shawl curling at the end. Maybe that would help too. But anyway, huge failure, but I didn't let it make me give up, and I'm continuing to move on, and definitely learned a few things from designing this shawl. For what I'm knitting, basically it has been mostly, well, I say mostly the Wonder Woman shawl, and that's really not true because I haven't gotten a lot of work done on that one. I've been busy because DFW Yarn Crawl is coming up, and I am hard at work getting ready for that. So I haven't really had as much knitting time. So this is where I am in the Wonder Woman shawl. I'm trying to kind of open it up a little bit. It's on the needle, so it's hard to see. But you can kind of get the idea of the W there. So just last night, I just finished the final row of the yellow section, and that is the last of the yellow. So I'm going back to the red. You have the short rows that will get the final, I want to say V, but I guess the point of the W there and there, and then the final border across the top. So there is still, especially with the short rows, still a fair amount of stuff to do on this, but I do feel like I am definitely approaching the toward the end of the shawl, and I'm really looking forward to getting it off the needles and stretching it out and seeing that gorgeous Wonder Woman symbol on the shawl. And already thinking about doing a second one in some different colors for me, since this one is a gift. So that has been a good project Really, really good design. The short rows are written as wrap and turns, but I changed them to German short rows, and it was really easy to do that. So yeah, I'm still having lots of fun with that project. Then, let's see, what else am I working on? Grab my bags here. Then I am continuing this sock. So have mustache yarns. This is dark side EPV, extended play version basically. And this is the second sock. So almost done with this. You can't see it quite because I've still got it on the needle protector, but I just got to the red color in the rainbow, and basically I need to go back through the rainbow and then into the black, and then once I get to the gray, I can start decreasing for the toes, and then this sock will be done. So not a whole lot left. I guess that's maybe 1.5 inches, about thereabouts. Before I start the toe decreases. So hopefully next time those will be a finished object. And oh, I put them in the wrong bag. No wonder the yarn wasn't. I was trying to just pull the yarn out of the yarn ball in the bag. Anyway, so I'm also working on that. And then when I finish this, I already have some more self-striping sock yarn wound up to start a new pair of self-striping socks. So I will show you guys that next time, because again, I assume I'm going to be finished with that. And I've also worked on a project that's been in hibernation a little bit. So this is the long and winding row cowl. Yes. Like I said, it's been in hibernation for a while. I couldn't remember the name. So this is a cowl that I'm making with hand spun. If you've watched the podcast, I talked about this before. This is hand spun that unfortunately I over twisted, and I'm discovering that as I'm knitting with it, that it is not soft. Definitely, even though this is a cowl, it's not really something that I'm looking forward to putting around my neck. I'm basically using it as it's probably just going to be something that is decoration, because it is pretty. I mean, if you look at it, it's just really, really pretty, but it doesn't feel very good. And it should feel good, because if I remember right, this is a merino, and so it should feel really good and soft, but I spun it very badly. So it's kind of my lesson to remember, don't spin things over twisted, because it creates yarn that does not feel good. But basically the reason that I picked this back up is because Luke has been taking swim lessons, and so for 30 minutes, you know, I'm basically sitting out there watching him in his swim lessons, but I'm just sitting there, and so it's perfect knitting time. And I tried a couple of different projects, like the sock and whatnot, but especially when it was time for him to get out of the pool, I had to, you know, knit to the end of the row on the sock, and then put it, get it all sorted and put it in my needle protector and get it back in my bag. And it was a little bit cumbersome just to be able to quickly put away. Whereas something like this, where it's a very easy repeat and just goes round and round and round, I can stop at any point and just pop on this needle protector and put it in my bag and be done. So it turns out that this is a really, really quick and easy project to bring to his swim lessons. So 3 swim lessons worth of knitting that I've done on this. And this is what I have left of this section. I say that because as I was winding the yarn, it broke because I put so much twist in it and there was a thin spot, and so it broke. So I also have that much more. So I've got this plus this. So it's going to be kind of a pretty tall cowl. And I want to use up all of it because there's not much else that I can do with this yarn, and I don't want it to necessarily go to waste. So I guess I'll just keep working at it during his swim lessons and see how long it takes me to get through the yarn. But I'm not in a rush to finish it, so I will get through it whenever I get through it. So that is what I've been actively knitting on for the past 2 weeks. There are a couple of other projects that are on the needles that have been a little bit in hibernation. but at least that is what I have actually been working on. What I'm dyeing, pretty much all the things. Like I mentioned earlier, I have DFW yarn crawl coming up. I'm doing a trunk show at the Knitting Fairy. I'm basically taking over the entire front room of the Fairy, so my stuff will be there the entire 10 days of the crawl. And I am setting up next week on Wednesday. So really, you know, trying to replenish stock, especially with self-striping, because that's the stuff that has been the lowest stock and the most time intensive. So that's really what I've been trying to work on, especially the past 2 weeks. So with that in mind, I also have a special exclusive self-striping that will be for the yarn crawl. So if you're not in the local area, I apologize that basically this is unavailable to you. But I'm kind of enjoying doing these exclusives. It's fun to come up with these colors and the names. I kind of decided, I think, that Monty Python and the Holy Grail is just going to be my well to go to for naming these exclusive colorways. And so that's what I did with this one. So Elisa from the Knitting Fairy told me the theme that she's going to be using for the decorations and whatnot for the yarn crawl. And I think she likes to keep that secret until the crawl, so I'm not going to say what the theme is, but the colors may give you at least some hints toward what the theme is. Try not to say the theme in my head. So I came up with this colorway, and this is very much my other two exclusives for DFW Fiberfest and for Houston Fiberfest were much brighter colors. So these definitely are not bright colors. So there is the exclusive, and then I have a small sample knit up. I didn't do an entire sock, so a small sample knit up with these colors. So this is called King of the Who. So if you're familiar with Monty Python and the Holy Grail, it's the scene with the peasants digging in the mud, and Arthur comes along and he says, you know, who lives in that castle over there? And it was like, well, who are you? I'm Arthur, King of the Britons. King of the who? The Britons. And then it's, who are the Britons? Well, you know, we all are. Well, I didn't vote for you. Well, you don't vote for king. I mean, it goes on, and it starts talking all about systems of government, and it's hilariously funny, way funnier than me trying to say some of the lines. But anyway, so these colors kind of reminded me of, especially the green and the brown, reminded me of that scene. So, you know, the peasants digging in the mud, and then I was looking at Arthur's symbol that he wears on his chest, and it's a sun. So the yellow and in some ways a little bit the orange also does that. So that's why I wanted to pick something from that scene for the quote. So anyway, so this will be available at the Knitting Fairy during DFW Yarn Crawl. So if you are in the area and you like this, then you can get it there. If you're not in the area and you like it, maybe you can convince someone to pick it up for you. I cannot sell it outside the yarn crawl because that would kind of go against the exclusivity thing. Anyway, so that's kind of what I've been working on. The other thing I've been working on, I can't remember if I mentioned it, we're doing the DFW Hemophilia Foundation walk again this year. We did a fundraiser, we being Elisa from the Knitting Fairy. We did one last year where she designed a hat, and I had a special yarn color that was based on that. The reason for it is there is one of the knitters in our community, Tim, whose boyfriend has a son with hemophilia, and so they participate in this walk, and Tim asked if we could do a fundraiser for it. And last year we raised, it was over $677. Elisa got like extra donations at the shop, and so I didn't get that number, but I know at least through the yarn and the kits, $677 that we raised. So that was super awesome. So Tim asked us to do that again, and so I came up with, and actually have a little bag of the yarn over here. Sorry for crinkles, I didn't take it out of the bag. I have a few skeins, a few being 8. that I've dyed of the colorway. That is a sky, let me take one out of the bag so you can actually see it a little better. It is a sky blue with silver flecks, because Brian, the young man with hemophilia, so that was his favorite color, sky blue with silver flecks. And so that is hopefully what I have created, sky blue with silver flecks. And the name of this color is Sir Brian. So that maybe not focusing perfectly well. Anyway, so it's the DFW Hemophilia Foundation fundraiser for 2017. And we will have, Elisa has designed a fingerless mitt pattern in 4 sizes, so very small to adult male, basically. 4 sizes of this fingerless mitt pattern. And so when you get the kit, you get 1 skein of the yarn and the pattern. And we haven't sat down and figured out the pricing yet and how much of the kit price will go to the donation. We try to do as much of it as possible going to the fundraiser. So I will get those details ironed out. But basically we will have those 8 skeins, plus if I'm able to get any more dyed before then, available during the yarn crawl. And then we'll also, once those are gone, we'll be taking prepaid pre-orders and then I'll dye basically to order. And then I will also, for those of you not in the local area who would like to contribute to the fundraiser, I will have it available on my website, so anyone can order the kit and get the yarn and the pattern, and then have a large chunk of that purchase price going toward the fundraiser. So all of those details will be coming up, but I wanted to show you guys the yarn, and pretty much that is what I've been dyeing lately. So if you have been watching the podcast, you know that, I don't remember which episode it was in, but a while back I mentioned that I was kind of taking a little bit of a break from designing, that I was feeling like I was just kind of churning things out to churn it out, or like if I had continued, I would just be churning things out to churn it out and not really doing anything that I was inspired by. And I think kind of getting in that headspace where I don't have to force myself to design something has been very helpful. And now I am kind of eager to maybe not jump back in full speed, but to get back into designing, which is good because I do actually have a deadline for something. The DFW Designers Collection, I am designing a pattern for that. And I did have another pattern in my head that I was thinking about doing for the collection, but it involves doing a little more trial and error and research, which just based on the time constraints, I don't quite have the time to do that and be able to get that pattern ready for the month that I'm scheduled for. So it's something that I still want to work on. It'll be a separate pattern. It won't be something in that collection. So I am going to do a hat pattern with some cable work, although I found this really kind of neat cable, and then this other design that uses, could be a 1x1 cable, but the way you do it, it's called a left twist and a right twist, which I have used in other patterns. But I really like the way these two elements work together, and I sat down last week, got graph paper out, and really worked out the pattern and the design and the shaping at the top of the hat, because if you just do random or even decreases that are evenly spaced out, sometimes you kind of lose some of the patterning at the top of the hat. So at least on paper, I have what I think will work for the top of the hat, and now I just need to sit down and start knitting the sample. So I just say it felt really, really good to get the graph paper out and the pencil and just draw things and chart things out. So that felt really good. So again, I'm not going to force myself to do things like that, but whenever I do feel like doing it, I'm gonna bring out that graph paper and work on things, because it was a good feeling to just sit there and figure it out. anyway, so hopefully soon I will have that hat on the needles, doing the sample, making sure that everything on the paper actually works out whenever I have it on the needles. And then after that point, I will be looking for a few test knitters. So I will let you know when that comes. And then after that, I keep saying it, I promise I will get back to that green shawl. I have the yarn ready. I need to sit down with that one and replan that, and then start knitting that sample as well. So we'll get to it. So I've got a couple of things that are in my head, and that hopefully will be on the needle soon, and some new designs that will be coming out. The DFW Designers Collection, my month right now is scheduled for November, and so that'll probably be the next thing that comes out, but it'll only be available to the collection for the year that the collection runs, which is September through the end of August. And then after that, I'll be able to release it as a separate pattern, but when it's first published, it'll be exclusive to that collection. But there are other things that are in the pipeline that I hope to be able to release in a few months. So good news, my reading has definitely picked up, so that is definitely something I am very happy about. I think I mentioned either that I had just started or I was looking forward to starting the next book by Rachel Caine in the Great Library series. This one is called Ash and Quill. So it's the third book in this series. I have really enjoyed the other two books so far, so I was looking forward to this book. And yeah, this also was a good book. It was definitely something that made me want to keep reading. And you know, I'm getting kind of close to the end, and I had no idea if this was a trilogy or if this had more books after that. So I wasn't really sure, you know, is this the book that things are all going to get resolved? And as I'm getting closer and closer to the end of the book, I'm like, there has to be another book after this, because there is no way that all of this build-up could be resolved in, you know, like the next 20 minutes, because my Kindle tells me how much longer I have left to read in the book. And sure enough, yes, basically this book in many ways was another setup. So it's kind of another middle book setting up the big final showdown, I guess. Although even though it's a setup book, there was still a lot that was going on in this book, a lot of the character development and even a lot of plot that was happening. So it was an exciting book. It was a book that, these are characters that I'm familiar with, but they're still growing and expanding. And so I really, really enjoyed that book. And then whenever I finished with it, I was like, oh, sometimes it's really hard when you finish a good book to be able to find another book that you really want to get into right away. And so I thought, okay, so maybe I'll try for something a little bit different. And I mentioned this book, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this book, that I picked up a book that was kind of billed as a retelling of Pride and Prejudice with dragons. So kind of Pride and Prejudice in a fantasy setting. And I thought, okay, that sounded kind of interesting. So I thought, that's the book that I want to read. I will give it a try. So it is Heartstone by Elle, Katharine White. And this is the author's debut novel. And right now I haven't checked her website, but at least on Amazon is the only novel that has been published. And I wanted to show you the cover because I think it's a super cool cover. So there is the cover of Heartstone. And I just have to say, I loved this book. Loved it. Adore might even be the right verb for it. Oh, it just... Okay, so I think I know I've mentioned this, because I mentioned that like Pride and Prejudice retellings, some of them I've tried and just have not worked. But this is a book that is definitely a Pride and Prejudice retelling. You can see the characters, how they align. You can see the scenes that are playing out, that are the same scenes from Pride and Prejudice. But it also is very much its own story. The author is using the framework of Pride and Prejudice as a way of telling the story, but she doesn't let that get in the way of the story she needs to tell, but she also doesn't let her story get in the way of people who are familiar with Pride and Prejudice being able to recognize how that's being used. her characters are really great. The background and story, the world that she's created, because in fantasy, that world building is such an important part of it. The world she has created is really, really good. I was so sad when the book ended. I wanted to read more. I just really, really love this book. Really recommend it, especially if you are a fantasy reader or a Jane Austen fan, especially if you're both. So really, really, really love this book. And I'm looking forward to seeing what else this author comes up with. I should go check out her website and see what she's working on. If I remember right, I looked this up on Amazon. I think the book just came out like in January of this year. So maybe she's working on something else, and it'll probably be a while before it comes out. But I would love a follow-up to this because, like I said, these characters are so great. But I think that this author definitely has some talent and is worth keeping an eye on. As far as what I'm listening to, I started listening to Anne of Green Gables after the Anne with an E, getting the tone so very different from what the book is like. I just wanted to go back and get the optimistic Anne back in my head. And so I've been listening to that. I'm almost toward the end of listening to it. And it feels so good to go back to, like I said, to the optimistic Anne and to hear that story. And I probably will. I've got several of the other audiobooks. And then I have all the stories in hard copy, but I have several of the other audiobooks, so I'll probably listen to those, go on with a couple more in the series, and continue with Anne's adventures there. So good to get that back in my head. Watching, really, there hasn't been that much we've been watching. Broadchurch, I caught up on the last 2 episodes last night. And then I think next week is the season finale for that. Again, just lots and lots of stuff going on there. I'm still really enjoying that show. Kind of sad that this is the final season for it, because I do think that it's a really compelling show with a great cast of characters and just lots and lots of just little intricacies of the relationships of the people in this town. So really enjoying that. Other than that, we really haven't been watching that much, so not much else to say there. So I'm not sure if you noticed, but my What I'm Knitting section, I did not mention my Beauty and the Beast shawl. That is because, unfortunately, that is in hibernation. I have not been working on it. Not for any, fault with the pattern, not for any other reason. I've just been more interested in the Wonder Woman shawl. And so that's what my knitting attention has been focused on. But I'm eager to get back to the Beauty and the Beast shawl because I really am looking forward to working on that. I still only have that little bit that I started. So I am looking forward to working on that. But I wanted to mention that, don't forget, we have the quarterly knit along that is going on now. This quarter ends September 30th, so you still have a good chunk of time for this knit along. The theme is any pattern, doesn't have to be a shawl, any pattern inspired by or named after a fairy tale. So if you have something that you are working on or want to work on that fits into the theme, please join us for the knit along or crochet along. Definitely crochet projects are more than welcome, because there are some really, really good prizes for this quarter. And to win a prize, you do need to post in the FO thread, so the finished object thread. So make sure you do that. I will link in the show notes to the chat thread, which has kind of the very minimal list of rules, so you can see how to participate. And I hope that you will participate. There's some fun projects that are being worked on now. And yeah, please come join us. So, update on the kittens. This is Wally. If you saw him in a previous episode, you might notice that he's a little bit bigger now. He's also asleep. I kind of picked him up from his nap, so he's definitely a sleepy kitty. But he and I have bonded quite nicely, He is my little shadow. He follows me around, and whenever I'm here at my desk, there's a spot kind of between my chair and the wall here that he curls up in. In fact, that's where he's been as I've been recording this whole episode. And as I'm petting him, I'm realizing that he has taken his collar off again. Yesterday he started doing that multiple times, and so he seems to have done that again. I'll have to go find his collar. Anyway, so we are doing really nicely. Eva, who also is here in this room and taking a nap, so I won't disturb both the kittens. She is also doing well. She and my husband are bonding as well. And I think Sam, we're still having our little morning times. And Sam's been spending time with Luke. He'd been doing that before we got the kittens. And he seems to still be doing that. So yeah, we seem to be getting along. The cats themselves are getting along, not necessarily best of friends, but definitely working with each other. As far as their eyes, Wally's all healed up finally. Sam is the only one that still has a little bit of the eye infection thing going on. So we're almost healthy cats. And yeah, these guys are just balls of energy whenever they are really playful, and enjoying kind of seeing them make their chasing mice and doing leaps whenever we're playing with an interactive toy with them. So it's definitely been fun to be having them around. So I just wanted to show you guys how big Wally has gotten already. Eva is much smaller still. In fact, I weighed them a few days ago, just getting on the scale, me getting on the scale, holding him, and then me getting on the scale without him, and then subtracting to find the weight. Wally is 2 pounds heavier than Eva. And they're supposed to be roughly the same age. They're not litter mates, but they're roughly the same age. And he is definitely a growing boy and making sure to eat lots and lots of food. Though I want to make sure that we're not giving him too much so he becomes overweight. But he's got so much energy when he is awake that he's probably burning off all those calories. Anyway, so they're fitting in really, really well. And there he goes. Yep, like I said, nap time, sleepy time. I don't know if you can hear him purring, but he is definitely purring. And I don't know if you can hear Luke in the background. He's in his playroom playing, so you might be hearing him in the background as well. But I'm going to go ahead and get this guy back to his nap, so he's not facing the sun, basically, out the window, and he can go back to sleep. And Luke is already knocking on my door and basically trying to get my attention, and so I think that's about it. All I had planned for the today's podcast episode, so good timing for me to end this. Luke starts kindergarten next week, so after that I will be able to be recording these episodes while he's at school, so I won't have to worry about his playing in the background or being interrupted. So I'm looking forward to that. But if this is the first time that you have watched the podcast, thank you so very much for watching. And for those of you who are viewers who've come back, thank you for coming back, spending this time with me, chatting about knitting and t-shirts and shawls and everything else. And I will see you guys again in 2 weeks. Thanks, and happy knitting.